I think all of us understand that pensions have been on the top of our priority list this year, public pension reform. And in the course of the debate over the issue, not just really this year, but previous years, many of the members of the General Assembly and certainly myself felt that there should be an independent actuary to take a look at the pension systems that we have in our state. They have in their own actuaries, but to have a clear view that's independent of the retirement systems themselves. We have an Auditor General in Illinois. It's provided for in our Constitution, and by a unanimous vote, I think, of both houses, yes, the Auditor General was renominated for a third 10-year term. So Bill Holland, our Auditor General, has certainly won the confidence of members of the General Assembly. They elect him, actually, under the Constitution. And so the General Assembly passed a bill that would require an independent actuary to be retained by the Auditor General in order to review all of the assumptions, actuarial assumptions of the pension systems, review their practices with respect to estimates and assumptions. And it passed by a wide margin in both the House and Senate. And Speaker Mike Madigan was a leader in getting this done. And I remember speaking with him at a breakfast at the governor's mansion about how important he felt this reform would be, and I felt the same way. And I'm very happy that it passed. We're going to sign it here today. But I did want to have Leader Barbara Curry, who's been a member of the General Assembly for quite some time. She started at a very tender age. But Barbara is just one of the experts on the budget, on revenue, and on the need for independence in the House and Senate. And why don't you take a moment or two to explain this bill, if you would.
Thank you very much, Governor, and I'm delighted that you're about to sign this bill. Several years ago, we tried to create a firewall between the members of the pension board and the people who were actually going out and making investments. There was a concern that at least in some of the state systems, there might have been too close a relationship between the people who were doing the investing and thereby earning money as they did so, and the people who were choosing them. So we created a kind of firewall to make sure that any investments that were made so on good, sound economic grounds. And I think this is really a piece of that same puzzle. All this does is to say, let's have a second pair of eyes, have a look over the shoulder of the actuaries for the system to make sure that their assumptions are sound, to make sure that their numbers are right. So I think it'll give us more confidence, us in the legislature, more confidence in the work of the systems, and I'm delighted the governor is going to put his John Hancock at the back at the bottom of this bill. So thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Barbara. And just to reiterate, we are working, I would say feverishly, to try and get the ultimate package enacted into a bill form passed by majorities of both houses on the pension reform. But we felt this bill, which was passed separately, would be necessary to sign and sign quickly. I want to thank Senator James Claiborne, who is also a leader in the Illinois Senate, for his leadership on this bill. And I'm going to sign it now into law. I just want to reiterate that this has to be the year of pension reform once and for all in our state of Illinois. It's long in coming, frankly long overdue. It's absolutely necessary if we're going to have adequate resources for our children today, for their education. I've said on many occasions, you don't get to be a 4-year-old twice. You're only a 4-year-old once. If you're denied your early childhood education because we have an inability to reform the public pension system, I think that's a real sad day for the children of Illinois and a sad day for our state. So we're really pushing hard on this, and I mentioned last week I'm impatient that our members can't come to a meeting of the minds, but we're going to keep pushing until they do get there. And when we do, and we're signing those hopefully long overdue pension reforms, it'll be the completion of the task we've started today. Okay, Barbara, you get the one and only pen. And give that to whoever you wish.
All right.
All right, this is it. We did it together. All the other one at a time. A very important bill indeed. I had the honor one time of going to a convention of actuaries, and I can't think of a more exciting group than that fine group. So I'm sure they're very happy. There's one more actuary that will have a job thanks to this bill. Okay, that'll be the end of it now. We have to go.
If this actuary does not buy the assumptions underlying a proposed pension bond sale, can that person reject it because
Yeah, they're the authority. It's not so much a bond sale. It's taking a look at the annual projections of each retirement system about what their rate of return will be, their own investments and how they perceive that. And there's a lot of calculations that go into that. So it's more related to that than anything. But this person does have the authority to call the shots.
can he reject it? Can he reject whatever is on the table and send it back?
Well, that's the idea. It's an independent person who has that authority to make sure that the actuarial assumptions of each retirement system are correct. We want that not to be higher than it should be or lower than it should be. We want a second set of eyes to make sure that it's accurate. Because these are fundamental decisions that have a lot to do with the health of the retirement systems, and that's what we're interested in, healthy retirement systems. I was here not that long ago proposing that we have 100% funded pension systems in our state. We can achieve that goal within the next 30 years if we enact a pension reform plan. And I think we've come very, very close. We only have one issue left to resolve to do exactly what I outlined. And I think this is our moment. And I don't want us to miss that. And so we'll be pushing hard really every day until we get it done.
What's this position going to pay? Why do we need another position? Why can't the Auditor General handle this?
Well, and being an actuary is a highly technical job, and it should be. It's a person who has great abilities when it comes to numbers, to say the least. The Auditor General will hire the actuary, but you want to have a person with special expertise. If you have a heart problem, you may not want to go to a general practitioner who may know a lot about medicine, but there may be a specialist that knows something about the heart. And in this case, when it comes to actuaries and looking at pension systems in particular, it's a specialized science, really. And so you want to get the best person available, and the budget that the General Assembly will provide for is going to be the budget that the Auditor General will have to carry out this mission.
But he's not going to go back to ground zero and redo the estimates. It really is a second look over the shoulder of the actuaries from the systems themselves. So this doesn't have to be someone who's going to be hiring a whole team of people to work day in and day out, 24/7, 365 days of the year. It's a shorter term proposition than that.
Well, John, you've got deep into the weeds on these issues that you have and other financial issues. What do you think? Is it realistic to forecast 8%, 7%, 6%?
I think it's tough. I think it's tough to do that, and I think what we would like in the General Assembly, what the governor would like, would be to be sure that we have the closest match between what the systems are telling us the interest will be, the unfunded liability is, and reality. So this really is just a second pair of eyes. Well, and there's no question that no matter how. Right. Many, in fact, Mayor Bloomberg, I think, was quoted just on that point the other day. But I think the reality is that it's difficult to make. We do the same thing in budget making. You can't be sure what the next fiscal year is going to bring. So you make some kind of judgment call. And we just want to make sure that the judgment calls we're getting from the systems are as close to reality as the human mind can make them. That's all this is about.
Governor, can you update us then on pension talks?
Mhm.
So you said this week you were having another leaders meeting.
You know,
Supposed to have something
what has really happened since we met here 10 days ago or so is we've been talking almost daily on this issue with the various leaders, President Cullerton, Speaker Madigan, Leader Cross, Leader Rodonio, and their staffs, quite a bit of discussion with their staffs. And, we're making I think, headway when it comes to the facts, which is what I said we wanted to do 10 days ago, get as much information to these leaders as possible, because I think it's, when you look at the facts, it's pretty clear that if you phase in a requirement that local school districts have to pay the future retirement costs of those who work for them, for those who they negotiate contracts with over a period of time, if you phase in that requirement of having to pay for the future retirement costs, say over 12 years or 15 years, there is, I think, to my mind, an imperceptible impact on property taxes. There is no impact on property taxes. And that's just a fact. And I think it's time that we lay that out there and sort of deal with this canard that if you phase in a requirement that an employer have to actually pay the retirement costs of the contracts they negotiate, that's just simple, accountable government. And we need to kind of close that discussion so we can put that final plan into the bill. We actually had the university presidents and community college presidents agree to a phase-in plan. And it's time for the school districts to do the same.
How much closer are you to an agreement on that?
Well, I'm hopeful that we can make steady progress and get to that special day where we are ready to sign a bill. First pass it and then sign it.
Who needs to budge? Who's balking at the line?
Well, all four leaders believe in the fundamental principle of accountability and responsibility. That's just public finance 101. And I think everyone agrees with that. It's implementing this phase-in. That seems to be the key point. But, you know, when you have a pension reform, it's going to have a impact on the local school districts in that they don't have as big a cost in the future as they would today. The pension reform will save them money. And so when you phase in this requirement of actually having to pay for it over a long period of time, then it really has no impact whatsoever on their budget over a reasonable period of time.
Governor, you said a couple of weeks ago, thought you might have something for the legislature to vote on by July 1st. Still holding.
Well, we're trying hard for that. You know, I have to definitely get the budget approved by the 30th of this month, and I am applying plenty of attention to that. That document arrived, and we've been going through it literally line by line on the budget, and we'll be acting on that before the deadline, certainly. So that has to be done. Ideally, it would be done same time we could do a pension reform, but clearly we'll get the budget done in the proper time by the deadline, and hopefully have more progress from members of the General Assembly, the leaders in particular, on coming to a meeting of the minds on this one issue that's holding up $83 billion of liability savings for the taxpayers of Illinois. It's beyond me how you could let this one issue hold up a fundamental overhaul of our public pension system that has been in the waiting for 3 decades. So we really have to understand that now is the time this year to get the job done.
The Pew Institute is going to release a report too that again ranks Illinois pretty much the bottom as far as the percentage of funds in the pension system.
Well, I think it's another log in the fire. Hopefully that fire is burning for our members of the General Assembly, that this is not something to delay on, to put aside. It's time to act. And we have a reasonable plan that, frankly, you know, a lot of folks have worked so hard on this year, and it's got one last provision to work on, negotiate. We do that, and we can deal with what these outside agencies have said, and we know ourselves. I mean, I have to deal with the credit rating agencies. I know when I sign our budget, they're going to say some good things. The Medicaid reform was passed last month, and I signed it into law, and that's a good reform. I think they'll be pleased to see that we made substantial progress there in reducing our Medicaid liability. And same way with the budget itself. I think it's a pretty lean document. We'll make some reviews on that. But the pension is the biggest mountain we have to climb, and we cannot neglect. to climate.
Would you say would you agree with one who told me a few minutes ago that with each day that passes, the chances decline of being able to get this done before election day?
I really don't see the election day as really the key date. I think the date is right away for pension reform, because if one group does a study of Illinois and says we need to improve, and then a credit rating agency the next day says the same thing, how much more information do we need from independent outside entities to tell us we must make this giant step towards public pension reform? And I don't think the election should be the deciding date. It should be right now. Our economy in Illinois, we're in recovery. We have a long way to go. We have far to go. But having said that, our manufacturing is strong, and we want to keep it strong. And we don't want businesses to not invest in Illinois because they're worried about our public pensions. And so we need to roll up our sleeves and get that part of the job done. This not too long from now, Chrysler will be rolling off the new Dodge Dart, 4,500 Illinois workers making it for the whole world. And we want more companies like that to sign on to Illinois.
If this one piece is holding up the larger effort, why not put it aside as Republicans that revisit it later after the other?
Well, I could see right at the end of the General Assembly that this was becoming political, and I suggested that it be negotiated later. We could do it later. I didn't like to do it later because I believe in the principle of accountability, that school districts should have skin in the game if they're negotiating the contracts. But I said if we take it out, let's try that. And we tried. And it came out of committee. There wasn't a majority of votes for it in the House. That doesn't have a majority of votes. There's more members who feel responsibility and accountability has to be in. I understand that. And so the bill has to include some provision in that to get a majority. And it's ironic because the four leaders all agree that it isn't right for any school district, wherever it might be, not to have responsibility for contracts they negotiate. If they can just hand the burden of paying the retirement costs off to someone else, that's not a healthy situation.
Does accountability actually mean cost shift, though? I mean, can't accountability happen without shifting the cost? Does everyone actually agree that the cost shift has to happen?
I wouldn't even call it a cost shift. I would call it more an alignment. You should align the costs of any employee contract with those who negotiate it. Would we want the state of Illinois to negotiate a contract with state employees and then hand the bill off to the city of Chicago? It doesn't make sense. You have to be accountable. That's really what the fundamental principle is. Anybody who from outside or inside of Illinois knows that this is a fundamental principle of fairness. How to kind of negotiate the transfer, the realignment of what is today to what should be tomorrow is the nub of our challenge, and we're coming up with concepts hopefully that everybody can agree on.
Does that mean the state might still pay part of those pension costs?
If you phase it in over 10, 12, 15 years, the answer is yes. The state would be paying over a decade, and so the idea that somehow this is a property tax increase is just plain false. It isn't true. And I think it's important that we say that clearly, that if you phase it in over a longer period of time, and we're willing to do that, and you also reduce the overall pension burden, then those who are having to pay the retirement costs, whether they be school districts, community colleges, universities, or the state itself, are going to see economies and reductions that will redound to the benefit of the taxpayers.
DCFS is going to get pretty hard hit in this budget. They're talking about cutting 375 positions, child abuse prevention services. Is there anything that can be done?
Yeah, I visited with our director, Richard Calica, and I'm not happy with the work of the General Assembly in this area. The cut of $50 million to that budget of that very, very important department that guards and safeguards our children is just not acceptable to me. And so we will have more to say about that when we lay out our decision on the budget. But we have to make sure that children come first in Illinois, all the time, particularly children who are in harm's way. And this department is indispensable to the safety of children in Illinois. We have an excellent director with a long track record of excellence in child prevention and child abuse prevention. Well, you'll hear about that when I talk about the budget down the road a piece.
Governor, given how pressing the pension issue is, I mean, how long are you willing to wait on this? Except June 30th.
Well, you know, Adlai Stevenson, do you ever hear him? He was a fellow, used to be governor of Illinois, and then he was the ambassador to the United Nations, and there was a famous discussion there in 1962, and when he was in the UN. Do you remember this, Barbara? And he asked the Soviet ambassador about the missiles in Cuba, and the guy wouldn't give an answer, and he said, "I'm prepared to wait until hell freezes over." So I think we're prepared to do whatever necessary to get this public pension reform done and behind us. And so we're not letting up. We're not going to give anybody extra time. We really want to keep pushing the leaders and members to do what they know in their heart is the right thing to do, particularly for children. We just heard about the Department of Children and Family Services. What is squeezing their budget? The fact that we're paying over $5 billion in retirement costs today for the public employees, where just 5 years ago we were paying $1.7 billion. So when you have to pay $3.3 more billion, then there's less money for important things like schools and protecting children. So that's why this is such a big battle.
So when is the leaders meeting this week?
Well, we're meeting all the time, and we're meeting with their staff. So I would say that our plan right now, the way it's going, is to just continue positive discussions until we get to where we want to be when it comes to agreement. Okay?
Do you think that you'll call lawmakers back to Springfield before the end of the month to deal with pension?
Whenever we get an agreement on pensions is when we will head back. Well, I'd rather not. I think we would rather see something sooner rather than later, and that's certainly where I'm coming from. But I think it is important that we continue the steady pushing along that we have done over the last, really the last 6-7 weeks.
Governor, newspaper story last week said Governor Quinn signed a package of bills into law that will slash health care coverage for the poor.
Mm-hmm.
Does that hurt?
Well, it isn't true, really. Our Medicaid system, which has almost 3 million people in it, including more than half of the babies born in Illinois are born on the Medicaid system, the system was going to collapse. That's the fact. And not just me talking, but independent entities like the Civic Federation said it's in an ocean of debt. It'll be $21 billion in a few years if you don't act now to save the system from collapse. That's what I had to do. It wasn't easy. We had to make reductions in efficiencies. Basically, the system is still intact and is available for people who need it. It isn't as perhaps expansive as it was, but it has the fundamental elements of a healthcare system that we have to have in a major industrial state. That's why I signed the 5 bills. And I want to thank you, Barbara, for your leadership, because one of those did involve raising the price of cigarettes, cigarette tax, and we had to do that to get the revenue we need from Washington, matching revenue, but also to discourage smoking, especially by young people. If they don't smoke, that's going to save us literally millions of dollars over the next generation. So that's, to me, the smart way to go.
When the Supreme Court rules on the Affordable Care Act, are you worried about the impact on Medicare?
Medicaid, well, we have to see what the court decision is. I hope they affirm the Affordable Care Act, and that's what I go to bed at night praying for. And it'll make our country better. And well, if bad things happen, obviously we'll talk about it then. But I think it's important that we have a positive mental attitude on that bill. And there you go.
Thank you, Governor.
All right,
Great
good to see you,
be with
Barbara.
as
Yeah,
always.
thank you.